Alright, now we're on to our final chunk, chunk 6. For those of you who have been religiously following, making notes, clarifying with the teachers, and generally checking that you understand the story, please give yourself a pat on the back. Well done. Alright, you have survived the story thus far, and we're on to our last bit. Okay, right, for chunk 6, let me just put that in. Chunk 6, there you go. We're at the ending, right? So we're gonna find out whether they succeed. So actually find out whether family succeeds in getting rid of their dependence on technology, whether they manage to start afresh, alright, or whether they manage to rebuild their relationships with each other. Okay, so this is the end. It's actually an exciting part, alright, and a lot of things will be revealed towards the end. So, okay. The three of them went babbling off while George is being referred to here, let himself be vacuumed upstairs through the air flue. It's interesting, this part here. Why is it interesting? Why is it interesting that George lets himself be vacuumed through the air flue? Remember how vehement he was earlier on, how determined George was earlier on to get rid of technology, right? And get rid of their dependence on technology. This actually shows that maybe just minutes, after he declared that he wants to kill off the room, kill off the nursery, right? He actually returns back to his dependence on technology. Okay, so how determined George was earlier in declaring that they should get rid of their dependence on technology versus his inability to give up the conveniences, right? How do you spell this? Conveniences that technology brings, right? So instead of doing the things himself right now, because you need to show that you're determined, right, to not depend on technology anymore, he actually still goes back to using technology to help him fulfill his daily needs. Okay, so that's a bit of irony going on there. Right, let's move on. Okay, so here's George and Lydia talking, getting ready to leave the place. Right. Okay, what prompted us to buy a nightmare? Okay, here is further admission, alright, that buying the house was a mistake. Alright, so there you go. Let's just highlight that and put that on. So admission of or regret, admission of mistake in buying house. Okay, regret. Okay, so they go on talking about the technology. Okay, this is the part where they hear the children calling out, "Daddy, Mommy, come quick." Alright, then they go down. The children were nowhere in sight, Wendy, Peter, and they ran into the nursery. What do you think is going to happen next? They call out, right, their children's name. The door slammed. Wendy, Peter. Oops, it looks like they are being locked in. Let's see if we are right. Let's move on. Oh yeah, that's right. They've been locked in from outside. So, I mean, it's logical, right, to deduce that the children have locked up their parents. Okay, so what does it tell you about their relationship? Not very good, right, over here. So children willing to sacrifice his parents or relationship with parents in order to preserve the room. Okay, because over here Peter says don't let them switch off the nursery and the house. So it's probably out of desperation. It shows how desperate the children are, right? Okay. Okay, hold on. Just let me get rid of the formatting here. Okay. Right. So all this shows how desperate the children are, okay, to keep the room, to the extent that they're willing to sacrifice their parents. Alright, then they heard the sounds. The lions were on all sides of them. Okay, rumbling and roaring, the lions. Okay, so actually it's okay, right? Because the lions are not real, they are dreamt up by the children. Okay, let's read on to find out. Mr. Hadley looked at his wife. They turned, looked at the beast. Okay, so there's a lot of tension. Alright, tense atmosphere here. Alright, what's going to happen next? Alright, and then they screamed. Alright, so you recall, I think chunk 1, right? Also, when they found themselves in the room and the lions ran towards them and they screamed. But then in chunk 1, remember, they got out in time. So George was laughing and Lydia was crying or something like that. Okay, so same thing happens to them again. They screamed. But they don't seem to be running. So over here, it goes on to say, suddenly they realized why those other screams had sounded familiar. It's very interesting here. Why those other screams? Remember, throughout the stories, they've been hearing other screams. And what can we infer from here? They screamed and they realized why other screams had sounded familiar. Does it mean that the previous screams they heard were theirs? But how could that be, right? Because they were not previously in the Veldt. Only now, then are they in the Veldt. Okay, so how could this be? It's a bit strange. The story doesn't tell us. Okay, let's think a bit. Let's think a while. What do we know about the room? Well, we know that the room reproduces the children's imagination, right? So if the parents heard screams that sounded like their own screams, it could only mean one thing, right? It could only mean that the children have been dreaming up images of their parents being attacked by the lions. So it must have been the parents' images that were screaming, right? So that's a little spooky. But then again, that's still okay, right? Because the lions are not real, remember? The room conjures up images that have been dreamt up by the children. Okay. But then, think a bit about this. Recall, right, that in the previous chunks, remember George picked up things from the Veldt? Do you remember what these things were? First thing, it was his wallet, right? The wallet had been chewed on. There were blood smears on it, right? And then the smell of the lion. And then there was a scarf, right? Lydia's scarf. And the scarf was, how was it described? It was bloody. So, interestingly enough, right, there were items belonging to the parents found in the Veldt. So, if you put this together with the idea of the parents screaming in the Veldt, we could probably infer that the children have been plotting, or they have been preparing the lions to attack their parents by giving them items belonging to their parents, right? So as to familiarize probably the lions with the parents' scent, right? So it makes it easier for the lions to go for the parents. Well, now this is really creepy, right? Because it suggests that the children want their parents dead. Okay. So if you recall all these things, right? Actually now we're doing a lot of recalling, right? Because this is the last part of the story. And actually the parts that we are recalling now, they are signs, isn't it? There are signs, early signs that provide a clue as to what would happen towards the end of the story, right? So right now, because we're at the end of the story, it's like all these signs are starting to make sense to us. They are falling in place. Okay, actually there's a technical word we use for this. We can call it foreshadowing. All right, it means exactly this. Foreshadowing, right, is when a writer produces a clue early on in the story, or the writer produces many clues throughout the story to prepare the reader for what would happen eventually at the very end of the story. Okay, so I'm going to just push all this down first, because all this is going to take up another chunk of the analysis, so it doesn't interfere with our analysis here. So actually, right, if you recall this part, again, asking you to recall, there's an earlier chunk, I think it's chunk 3 or chunk 4, right, where the parents, they heard screams, remember? And they found those screams familiar, but then the parents couldn't get to sleep. Chunk 3 or 4. George and Lydia heard screams and they found it familiar, right? Familiar, but they did not go and check, right? They didn't check, instead depended on the bed to rock them to sleep. Again, it could have been earlier on, remember I said that it could have been that the children had gone into the nursery, right? And then the screams came from the children, right? Because maybe, you know, they were being chased by the lions or something, or they saw something terrifying there. But actually now that we put all these together, right, it's not the children whose screams George and Lydia heard in chunk 3 and 4. It's their own screams. They were the ones screaming. The children have gone into the Veldt, but they have probably dreamt up or imagined scenes of their parents being attacked by the lions. And those screams were the screams that came from those images of Mr. and Mrs. Hadley, those parents. Okay, so actually those screams came from George and Lydia, not the children. Okay, so I mean, it is alright to be a bit confused earlier on when we read the story, because it wasn't so clear. The writer doesn't make a lot of things very clear, doesn't state a lot of things. He leaves us to infer. So it's only at the end of the story that things that had been previously confusing to us or unclear to us now become a bit clearer, because now we're getting more information, right, about the story, about the children, about the parents, and about the kind of place the Veldt is. Alright, okay, so let's move on. So okay, so interesting, this part actually tells us, right, what does it tell us? It tells us that that the lions are real after all, or the lions have become real. Okay, so recall again, you know, in the earlier chunks, right, there have been foreshadowing going on because the parents have always commented on how real the lions appear. Okay, and then there was also another chunk, right, where I can't remember whether it was George or Lydia, right, who likened the room to a human, right? Said something about, you know, what if the lions were alive, and then something about killing the room, right? Remember? So there has always been the suggestion that the room might become alive, that the lions may be real. Okay, so actually what can we infer from all these? Okay, big point coming up. It suggests that all these suggest that technology supersedes, or rather it means goes beyond human understanding. Alright, it's as though the humans do not fully understand what they have created. So in a way, the lions seem to have crossed over into the real world, you know, without the humans fully understanding why or how. So we can say that it's a story about how technology has gone out of control. All right, you know, technology which we all embrace, which we all think have a lot of benefits, all right, and help us do a lot of things, make things in life easier. Okay, this is a story that tells you some of the horrors, all right, that would come about when you don't fully understand the technology you're using, or when you're abusing technology. Okay, you are using it or relying on it too much for your own good. Okay, right, let's move on to the very end of the story. Okay, let's see if I can bring out this part here. Right, okay. Well, here I am. David McLean comes in. Okay, then there's no more description about the parents. I don't really know what happened to the parents, but I think it is logical to deduce that they have been eaten by the lions. Okay, so he stared at the children. The children are seated in the Veldt. They are eating a little picnic lunch. Interesting. Alright, and so David McLean comes in. He sees only the children. He doesn't see their parents. So the children looked up and smiled. He asked them, "Where are your father and mother?" They replied, "Oh, they'll be here directly." Okay, and then over here, right, he saw the lions fighting and clawing and then quieting down to feed in silence. Okay, so no talk about the death of the parents yet, but I think it makes sense, right, to conclude that it is the parents that the lions are feasting on, right? Lions eating the parents. Okay, now they're done with the flicking. So a shadow flickered over Mr. McLean's hot face. Shadow. When you see shadow, right, it's always something that is rather menacing, something rather ominous. Ominous and menacing. Okay, what do they mean? I think earlier on I've explained, right, that ominous means that there's a suggestion that something bad is about to happen. Alright. So many shadows flickered, and the vultures were dropping down from the sky. Vultures, these are creatures that are scavengers, right? They feed on the dead. So more signs pointing to the parents' death. Okay, vultures scavengers. So, you know, there's a sense that they're gonna come down and finish up what the lions have left behind, right? So it makes it very real, and it confirms the fact that indeed the lions have been eating somebody. Okay? And when the story ends with Wendy saying, "A cup of tea?" Okay, so look at, you know, the children's reaction, because it is quite obvious, right, that the lions are feasting on their parents. Look at their reactions, highlighted in yellow. Wendy asked if McLean wants a cup of tea. They looked up and smiled. They're eating a little picnic lunch. They seem to be very calm, not bothered at all by parents' death, right? There's some contrast going on there between the peaceful scene of children having a little picnic and the parents' gory deaths by the lions, right? So, you know, it's like they are enjoying their parents' plight. You know, almost like, you know, they're enjoying the consequences or the results of what they have planned. Okay, it shows that they have no feelings at all for their parents. Okay, we can also use the word nonchalant. It means they don't care. Don't care. Not bothered at all. Okay, so what does it tell us about children? It's very sinister, right? Sinister. Okay, there's something creepy, something wicked about them. All right, they just fed their parents to the lions. Okay, so there you go. We have come to the end of the analysis of all 6 chunks of the Veldt by Ray Bradbury. I hope you've enjoyed the story as much as I have. It's a very rich story. I think that after the chunks, right, you should go back and read the story a second time. Alright, because now that you've gone through the analysis, I'm sure the story will become richer and also clearer. Parts will become clearer to you. So use the analysis, look at the notes that you have made, go back, reread the story, and see what other parts are there that you don't understand. Come to class and clarify with the teacher. Alright, so thank you for your attention.